Welcome everyone to Office Hours with Rod McDermott, founder and CEO of Project Activate and CEO of McDermott & Bull Executive Search, one of the nation's top executive recruiting organizations with offices throughout the US, Canada, and Europe. Office Hours is a live video series where we answer your most challenging job questions about either landing a job, pursuing your dream job, or overall career advice. I'm your co-host, Kristen Farrenfort, and today's topic is how to discuss gaps in your resume. Rod, how's it going?
It's going good. I love this topic too. This is coming up a lot these days because everybody's trying to figure out how do I optimize my LinkedIn and how do I optimize my resume. So not only do I get discovered, but I get chosen to be interviewed, right? And you don't want to have things in there that might turn somebody off. And it happens. I got to be honest with y'all. It happens to us. We try to be consultants to our clients. And so when we send a candidate forward to a client, oftentimes when we, like, let's say we find your resume or we find your LinkedIn profile and we do a little bit of deep dive on your background, we're then going to reach out to you. And if we see gaps in the resume, that might not like turn us off too much. We're going to reach out and try to figure it out. And then once we figure it out and we like you as a candidate, we're going to send you forward to our client. And the clients sometimes will push back and say, oh, we didn't like this. And we'll say, hey, let's get past the resume because we already interviewed the person and we really like them. And so we're submitting them now because we like them. The resume got them in the door and there was enough on there that we wanted to actually do a deeper dive and get to know them a little better. But now we're past the resume. We're at the person themselves and here's their story and here's what we like about them. So sometimes we have to actually talk our client into being more open-minded about it. I'll bet a lot of the people that are on this call today who have been hiring managers in the past have been faced with that too. You see a resume and you immediately look at it and you're like, yeah, no, I don't like this, or I don't like that. And so, one of the things I'm a huge proponent of, and I want to give one more quick story on this too, but one of the things I'm a big proponent of is answering every question that could come up. So when you think about your resume or your LinkedIn profile, and you think about what maybe questions it might raise or weaknesses it might present about you as a candidate, see if you can answer them in that, right? If you can answer it so somebody's like, oh, yeah, I get it. Okay, cool. I'm good with that. Took 4 years off to, raise a child, took a year off to care for a sick parent, something like that. If you can actually answer the question in the document itself, whether it's your resume or your LinkedIn profile, it gives you the opportunity to move forward without somebody trying to create their own conclusion from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that was another question I was going to follow up with. I think it's very common for, especially, mothers and a handful of, stay-at-home dads too, that stayed home and are caretakers and are like, hey, they're out of the house or they're in school. I want to get back in the job force or I want to get back in the workforce. Do you put that? So you put that on your resume that says, hey, caretaker.
I've seen it and I love it because it answers all the questions and you can even put something in there. So for 4 years I did this, and then we have a little conversation about it and then we move on and I go with the rest of your experience. So by the way, I want to point out too, I know you said this at the beginning, but guys and gals, whoever's on this, if you want to put forward questions, one of the things that Kristen just talked about a question, but we want to spend at least 50% of our time on these calls answering your hot questions that might be even unrelated to this topic. If you have something related to the topic, great. If it's unrelated, but it's challenging you in the interview process, or it's challenging you in your job search, or it's challenging you landing the job, you've been the bridesmaid, but not the bride kind of thing. Pop them in the chat or pop them in the Q&A and we'll make sure we get to your questions. But yeah, Kristen, I'm a big proponent. Well, first of all, this is a different world than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? Back then, people used to think if you had gaps in your resume, I still have this tape in my head that says if you've had jobs every 2 years, you're a job hopper. And then I look at my own resume, I'm like, wait, before I got into search, I literally had new jobs every 2 years. And so now I want to understand. I want to seek first to understand. And if you can help me understand that, left this company to pursue this. That's one of the things we do when we interview candidates. We have a section in our write-ups at McDermott and Bull called Drivers for Leaving. We want to know what your drivers were for leaving that company going back the last 15 years. So if you tell us, hey, I got recruited by my boss at this company to go to this company, that's kind of cool, because I think the devil that knew you took you from one company to another. That's a cool thing. But most people don't put that in their resume. They don't put it in. And I'm telling you, put that in, because what could look like a job hopping resume could actually be more of a hired gun resume. This happens a lot in Silicon Valley, right? If you're in software development, you could be a CTO and you like early stage companies. You've collected a bunch of seed stage stock options from like 5 different companies over the last 10 years. And your most engaged time is when there's a founder who comes to you and says, I have this idea and I need to build it out and I need to build out a team, but this is my idea and this is how I want to change the world. This is what I want to do with this product, right? And you say, I know how to do that. But once it becomes a commercial product and they're selling it and they're working on release 2 and 3 and new product add-ons, that's not your game. You're not good at that. You don't like it. It's corporate. You're reporting to a board. The board wants to know about the progress and all. You hate that stuff, right? So in a space like that, I would say Silicon Valley is kind of like hiring journeyman quarterbacks, right? Who are really good, who can take you to the playoffs maybe, but you want to leave, right, when the company is getting to this point where they don't really, it's scaled, you're no longer like as important, right? I say put it in your resume, put it right up top. This is what I love doing. By the way, here's my references. The last 4 companies I worked at, here's the CEOs who will be references for me, right? So you do great work, put it out there, put it on your stuff, make sure that you answer the questions so that you're not leaving me or a company hiring manager or a company talent acquisition person to fill in the blanks.
So you talked a little bit about industry rise. You see a lot of it in Silicon Valley and a lot of that tech industry, but in terms of function, do you see it more like, I think about CFOs, especially in our interim business who can work at three different companies. Do you see it a lot in different functions or specific functions that have gaps in their resumes?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. In fact, I went to a wedding last night of a very good young man who was 4 when we moved into the neighborhood, and he's getting married now. And I ran into a CFO buddy of mine who has been a client of our firm for many times. I don't do his work. Craig Lippis does his work, but we were talking, and that's what he's kind of doing now. He's like, I don't really want to be attached to any company. I had a couple of good exits, so financially I'm good. I want to be working on multiple things. And he's like, ideally, he's working 1 day a week at this one company now, based out in New York, even though he's in SoCal. And that's down from 4 days a week about a year ago. So he's been, easing off. And so he wants to do that. So I would say that's a really good thing. Let's dive into these though, right? So let's say that you either quit a job or you got laid off or something happened and now you're in transition. You're in transition a year, right? How many people, I want to ask you this, have been in transition, maybe not a year, but an extended period of time, could be a year, could be longer, could be less, where you feel like that gap in time on your resume is hurting you? If you can, I think we have the hand raise feature on this.
Raise your hand. We have quite a few coming up. We have 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you've been out for a while and you're thinking that this is hurting you, I want to share a couple things. Number one, we on the other side of the table who are interviewing you, we know that this is a fact of life. We know that transitions happen, especially during COVID. A lot of companies, were just reluctant to do anything. For 2 months, we literally lost 2 to 2.5 months of last year between mid-March and probably the end of May, early June. Companies just put everything on hold, right? Didn't do anything. And then some companies continue to struggle. If you're in aerospace, they continue to struggle through the year. They're just now starting to come out of it. But so everybody put things on hold. And so transition times are longer. I saw it in the tech recession. I saw it in the Great Recession. If you're in the mortgage business, out of the Great Recession, some people were out of work for 2-3 years. So here's what I tell you. Do things to stay relevant. If you volunteer for a nonprofit, put that on your resume. If you're not doing anything at all, do something. It'll actually clear your brain a little bit. It'll give you a chance to help out. Call a nonprofit you're passionate about. If you're a HR leader, if you're a sales leader, if you're a CFO, you can call them and say, hey, I want to volunteer my time. I don't necessarily want to be a full-time employee, and you don't need me being a full-time employee, but I want to volunteer and help out any way I can. Right. And if I can help you on the business side of things, great. If I can help you on the mission side of things, great. But I want to do some things so I can have a talk track so that when Rod or one of his people interviews me and I say, hey, so tell me what you've been doing the last year. I see you left your job in January of 2020. What have you been doing in the last year? Well, I took this course on XYZ. I've been reading a number of books on this because I'm kind of passionate about that. And I joined the board of this nonprofit, and I actually volunteer at this other one too. So now you're active, you're doing stuff. And then if you can pop in, yeah, the board I joined, it's interesting. Nonprofits are like for-profits. They're no different. They need cash flow to come in, and they have expenses taking the money out, but it's really no different. And the CFO at this nonprofit's great, but they hadn't done kind of the turnaround stuff. And when the spigot stopped on development dollars, I was able to go in there and help them kind of do cash flow planning and cash flow management, knowing that we weren't going to be raising development dollars for maybe 3 to 6 months. How do we make our nest egg last? You can share a story with me like that. I'm thinking that that's really cool what you're doing. Not only are you giving back, but you're also using your gifts and you're investing them. And then anything you can be doing, like I just went to a conference. If you're an aerospace person, I just went to this conference in Orlando a couple of weeks ago, and it was, 400 exhibitors, thousands of people at this thing. It was really, really cool. You could go to things like that. They're starting to open up now. I've heard of 2 now in the last couple of weeks, and you could improve your knowledge base about what's going on in the industry.
Well, also, and it helps not only your knowledge base, and then it keeps your mind fresh, probably helps keep the relationship good at home, getting out and going out and really kind of seeing everywhere. But it also helps network.
Oh yeah.
People C-levels are on boards of foundations, right? So these are people that are working at jobs and really looking to hire too.
Yeah.
We have a question from Sumia. She asked, I'm volunteering for several places. I would like to put myself down as a consultant and say that I am freelancing. I know it's not entirely honest, but the work I do is very much work experience. Interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know where it's not honest, by the way.
Yeah.
It feels good to me. I think it feels really good to me. And I think you could put it down, you could say it's an unpaid thing. I mean, here's my belief, right? So always be 100% transparent, because whenever you're interviewing, what you don't want to do is give somebody the sense that you're trying to play a little fast and loose with the truth, right? So you always want to be 100% honest. You say, listen, I've been out, but I'm active and I'm energized and I've got gifts out there and I want to invest those gifts. And I figured while I was on the sidelines, I might as well help out. And so I helped out with this nonprofit, and put that in there, put out the name of the nonprofit, put in that you're, freelance consultant or, unpaid consultant. You don't even have to put all that in, but just share it. Make sure you share it when you're having the dialogue about it. And so that way nobody feels like you're playing fast and loose with that, right? And I think it's totally fine. In fact, you can go to the CEO of that nonprofit and say, hey, I want to put in that I'm volunteering with you. You can put in the word volunteer consultant, right? And then put in what you've done. And like I said, there's a nonprofit I was on the board of for like 9-10 years in Santa Ana called Think Together. It was an after-school program. They've grown it massively in the state of California to serve now 200,000 kids. When I joined the board, it was serving 1,000 kids a day in about 12 schools in Santa Ana, and it had 8 employees. And today it's got like 2,000 employees, and they have so many big challenges, just like any corporation. They're doing 100 million a year in inflow and outflow. And so I remember I volunteered because I was on the board and I would help do board development work with the CEO. That was kind of my job, as well as raise money. But I also volunteered in the classrooms, right? Because that's what they do. And they would take volunteers like me. And so back in the day, Mitch was in 3rd grade. He's 26 now, my son, and he and I would volunteer every Wednesday. But I also would go to Randy, who's the CEO, and he and I would talk about some of the challenges they were having. And I'd help them with recruiting. We recruited a new CFO. We recruited a head of HR. We recruited a head of talent acquisition when they were really scaling and they had to hire 1,000 people a year. And so I would consult with them on that. I was doing real work, like my industry, right? So if you volunteer for the mission of the place, you can also reach out to the CEO and say, listen, I'm a CFO. Can I sit down with your CFO and find out some of the challenges? Maybe I could be a sounding board for some things. And now you are investing your treasures, your talents into that nonprofit. It's a big thing. It's a really cool thing. But there's a lot of ways to get relevant work experience in those gaps on your resume.
Relevant work experience also, like I said, they become a resource to you, and they also become a referral to you, right? They become your referral, and they become someone that people you eventually trust, and they trust you.
Yeah.
Another question came in and it said, is volunteer dismissed by hiring managers?
So it's interesting. And again, I want to challenge you all on this call to not listen to some of those negative tapes that jump into your head. And I'm not saying they're not true. Some of them might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a big believer in, control what I can, control the controllables, and the things I can't, I'm just going to be cool with, right? So do I know for a fact, it's a great question, by the way. I'm not trying to dismiss the question. I will answer it, but I can't control how every single hiring manager looks at every single resume. But what I can say is that the person on the other end who's looking at your resume, they're another human being just like you. In fact, their story might be very similar to yours. They might have had a journey that looks like yours. They might have had a time when they were out of work for a year or 6 months or whatever that could be very similar to you. And so by just looking at those things, and taking the effort and the time to plug something into your resume, you now give yourself, you're now actually giving it a try. You're actually saying, listen, while I was on the sidelines, I was being productive, right? I was not just kind of hanging out, waiting for my chance to get in the game. I was also being productive. I was doing something for the world. And putting it on your resume, I think it might be dismissed by some hiring managers, and it might be embraced by other hiring managers. So at the end of the day, maybe it evens out. Maybe it's more embraced than it is dismissed. Who knows, right? But let's try it. Let's put it down there.
And that's probably the company you want to go towards.
Yeah,
is the company that has empathy and knows and is a human being that says, oh, I too have been out of work. I too had to look after children or became a caretaker, and I see that in a person. So completely agree with you on that one. Another question.
Can I address this real quick before we jump into this question?
Yeah.
I want to ask this question, and you're all like anonymous on this. I don't think anybody can see anybody, but we can see hands raised. And I'd be curious, because this is a question that comes up too. Like, if I was dismissed from my job, if I was terminated from my job, how do I address that, right? Because this is similar to, like, I'm out of work for a while, and what's the elephant in the room? And if it comes out, and how do I address it? I will tell you that no candidate has ever told me they've been terminated, ever. I've had a client who has actually told me that they've been terminated from a job before, and I love how they wear it on their sleeve, and they wear it as kind of a badge of what they learn. And I literally had this client on a panel once in front of 300 people say, quote, and sorry for the language, they fired my ass, literally. And they should have, because I did a bad job, and here's what I did wrong. But here's what I learned. In the next venture capital firm that I talked to about a startup that they had that was struggling, they liked the $75 million MBA that my old VC put me through. Basically, he went through $75 million of cash and destroyed the company. But it was like a $75 million MBA. And the next company he went to was down to their last $1 or $2 million. And he was able to sell that company over a 3-year period. They got in there, restructured it. He made the cash work, got it profitable. They sold it for $300 million. So it was a really great learning experience. So I want to, by a show of hands, how many people have ever been terminated from a job? Come on. Okay, I'm seeing some hands going up. Being laid off is practically the same thing as being terminated. Somebody asked that question. Laid off or terminated? So Well, you can look at it the same way. Let me give you an example too, because I mean, let's face it. Okay, thank you for raising your hands. Now I want to ask another question. If you can put your hands down, how many people as hiring managers have ever had to terminate somebody because they weren't really up to what they wanted and they were laying other people off? And so they said, hey, we're going through this layoff. We don't really need your skills right now. Downsize. There's somebody who said that. But and it's kind of a nice way of doing it, right? But at the end of the day, the hiring manager is not really firing you, but they're really kind of like you weren't kept, right? And you're wondering, why wasn't I kept, right? You kept a lot of other people. Here's what I'm getting at. You don't have to raise your hands on this, but this happens a lot, right? Where we didn't get the vote, we didn't get the nod. I had somebody come to me once, an HR guy, and I love this guy for doing this. He's a good friend, and he said to me, this is weird. This is years ago, but he and I met on a Thursday, and we had lunch, and he's like, I got 2 searches I want to kick off with you next Tuesday. And I go, cool. He goes, come by the office, and we're going to get those going. And Tuesday morning comes along, and he calls me, and he's like, listen, we can't meet today. I said, oh, okay. Do you want to reschedule? He goes, no, I got fired. And I go, you got fired? He was the one. He wasn't a candidate of mine, so I wasn't interviewing for a job. So technically what I said before was true. No candidates ever told me they've been fired. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, the CEO. And I go, yeah. He goes, I disagreed with him one too many times. Like, he came to me yesterday and he said, hey, I want to do this. And this is kind of how I want to do it. And he's like, I think that's a bad idea. Let me tell you why. And he just started going down the road. And he didn't ask the CEO, hey, I'll do what you need me to do. It was not a low integrity thing. It was totally fine. It was just a disagreement on process or opinion about something. It wasn't doing something against his integrity or any of that. It was just, I don't agree with that approach. And the CEO kind of looked at him and he said, you know what? I don't think you're my right HR partner. Yeah, you're not my right HR partner. Let's do this. Today's going to be your last day. I'm going to work out a package for you. I'm going to take good care of you. You're a good guy, but I need somebody who can be my partner. And you fight me too much. And I just don't want to be fought on this stuff. I'm not doing stuff wrong. I'm not doing stuff low integrity. I want to do things the way I want to do them because that's what me and the board have decided. It's $1 billion company, right? It was $1 billion public company. And so he said, I didn't realize that it's his agenda, not mine. And so he learned a lot from this. And he actually told me that. And I said, so what do you take away from this? He goes, well, the next time I'm going to ask the CEO, cool, I'm happy doing it that way because that's not a low integrity way of doing it. But are you open to another idea or another suggestion? And if the CEO says, no, I'm really not, cool, I'm good. I'll do it. I'll get it done. So you have to realize, and I have an executive coach who has said this to me before too. He said, it's every employee's job to do everything in their power to make their bosses happy without losing their integrity. So that last qualifier, you get to decide what's integrity for you, right? If you just think that's not the right way, and if I don't speak up, then that's low integrity. Or if you think I'm not going to do that, that's wrong, that's immoral, that's not tied to my moral, then you got to speak up. But if your boss is just kind of talking to you about a difference of opinion, and in this particular case, they don't really want to hear yours, you got to make your boss happy or you might not have a job. The reason I bring all this up is this is about the resume too. It's about getting very clear on this. And one thing I want to share with people, because this happens too often, if this has ever happened to you, where in your past you have a direct, report, one of your bosses who probably, like, you're not keeping in touch with them. You didn't like them all that much. They might not have liked you all that much. And deep down, you're like, yeah, they use this as an opportunity to get rid of me, to clean house, and I hear this before, like people come in and I say, hey, how come you left so-and-so? We got a new CFO. I was the controller and they wanted to bring their own people in. Well, that doesn't happen. It really isn't like that. What happens is they come in, they test you out and you're not what they want. And so they release you. Okay. And I'm not saying 100%. Sometimes the other stuff happens, but we, in our own attempt to protect our egos, sometimes go down this path of, well, it wasn't me. They just wanted to bring their own team in. And most CEOs I talk to, most CFOs I talk to, when I'm doing a search to replace them, they're like, hey, I came in and I gave them a try. It just wasn't working out. They weren't doing what I needed to do, and I needed to replace. And so what I challenge you all to do is, if you have fences out there that could need some mending, pick up the phone and call. I've suggested this a number of times to folks in the past. And when they do that, they generally call me back. I've never had anybody call with a negative result, but I say, is there anybody in the last 10 years that you've worked for that might give you a bad reference? And they say, well, I just wouldn't give them as a reference. I'm like, no, no, you got to understand the world is very small. I don't care if you worked in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or, Fort Worth or wherever. I know people that might know you.
Yeah.
I know people that worked at your old company. I'm going to do what's called a back channel check. I'm going to check up on you. And this happens all the time. And then I'll have some people say, well, is that legal? Can they do that? Yeah, it is. And I can call people. I can call who I want to call.
Yeah.
And they can tell me whatever they want to tell me. And some people, I had one guy say to me, who's a friend of mine, he's like, well, I think HR has basically told everybody, just, name, rank, and serial number. Don't tell anybody anything because we don't want to get sued. Well, when I call somebody who's a friend of mine, who's your former boss, and they'll say, off the record, Rod, let me tell you about this person. Okay. That stuff happens. So what I'm saying is, go where those exist out there. If you're able to kind of conjure up that courage to go out there and pick up the phone. I had this happen to me once. I had a guy who worked for me years and years ago. Now he's at Microsoft and he's very successful. He was a challenge. And I happened to be up in Seattle, and he heard about it from a mutual friend of ours who still works for our company. And she called me and she said, hey, so-and-so wants to buy you dinner. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And he came back and he said, hey, listen, I got to apologize for how I was kind of obstinate and I was in your way when you wanted to do things. And I look back on it now, and I learned so much from you. I just had to get away from you were moving fast and I was slowing things down, and I get it. And what you taught me has made me successful here. I've tried to incorporate and really look back on, how was Rod right? And I spent a lot of my time thinking about, during the time, how was Rod wrong? And I'm like, wow, this is the same person?
Yeah.
And he's a stud. He really is. And it made a big impact on me that he did that. And so if somebody called me and said, hey, I saw that so-and-so used to work for you, do you have any comments on him? I'm like, yeah, this guy's grown so much. You just got to make sure you handle those things. So let's go to the questions. I know we've got a few questions that popped up.
Yeah, we have a few here. One from Jody, who asked, I have been a consultant for 7 years, but had to take time off. First, for personal health reasons, and second, for help to care for others. I have enough project work I could talk about where the lack of work recently may not be noticed. I'm curious if you would recommend being upfront about having taken time off, or to just talk about projects and not be specific about time frames.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't come up, or not to mention it.
No. Hey, Jody, listen, these are what I call the elephant in the room. Just because they don't come up doesn't mean it's not in their head. So anything that could be in their head, let's address. And so put it in your resume, right? I love where you say, consultant, 2014 to 2021, and list all the 7 assignments. You don't even have to put the dates on the assignments. Just put 2014 to 2021 and say, I wasn't always working, but I'd be on assignment and then find another. This is what I love about this, Jody. Somebody hired you for what you have up here, right? For what you know how to do. And they didn't necessarily hire you full-time. They wanted to bring you as a consultant. Sometimes that's more expensive. And you have an ability to actually convey multiple times what you know to go in and help these companies. There is a really good talk track around that. And the fact that you might have done it to take care of somebody as the initial reason, or maybe that was always something on the side. So you could say, hey, I can work for you 3 days a week, but I've got to take care of somebody. I love your story. I absolutely love it. And by the way, in this day and age, people are more and more open-minded. Remember what I said a couple of weeks ago. We are hired to solve problems, right? People are hired to solve problems. So if there's a problem out there, you have to position yourself as a solution. And that's what some of this consultant stuff can do. And it could give you an opportunity to actually list multiple different solutions that you've solved, or problems that you've solved.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about a little bit about being transparent in taking care of either someone else, taking care of yourself, being a caretaker. What about, and I don't know if it's necessarily, the attendance here, but for those that are a little bit younger, and have on there, like, taken a year off to travel, does that, yeah, for like a hiring manager, does that kind of sound like a flight risk, or someone that well, I don't know, maybe they'll go and travel, or what
No,
are your thoughts on that?
listen, put it in. So as a hiring manager, I love to see somebody that wants to live life. That person has, they've got a rich perspective on life, in my opinion, because
Yeah.
they want to have these experiences, they want to do things. And when you do stuff like that, if you say, listen, I've been working for 18 years nonstop, and I took my vacations, I did this stuff, but my spouse and I, or my kids and I, or myself, I wanted to go walk the Camino in Spain and take 2 months and do that. And then I took some time to go check out these other countries. Zach Smith, our head of coaching at Project Activate, he took like 8-9 months off in between jobs, right? Before he really launched his coaching thing, and went to a bunch of countries and lived in caves with Bedouins and, in Jordan and Petra and places like that. I mean, just amazing experiences. And when else can you do that? So that to me feels like a rich person who's looking for a rich life. I say rich, not in the financial sense, but somebody who's looking for a rich life. That's what we want. Those people come into the company and they make it a more attractive place for other people to work because they have a good energy about them. So I'm all for that. And by the way, I don't have problems when people come in and say, listen, I've got this trip planned. One of the best hires we ever made, your boss, came to me and he's like, listen, this sounds crazy, but 3 weeks after I start, I have a 2-week trip to Europe. Are you cool with that? I said, I'm better than cool with that. I love it. So come in, get the lay of the land, go off, have fun, disconnect, and then come back and dive in and get ready to go. So I'm a big believer in that. Share with people what you're doing. Not the whole world isn't like that. I get it. But you want to work for somebody that is these days. I mean, let's face it. We're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. I heard that recently. So let's enjoy our lives. Let's make sure we're working for people that give us great energy. And let's make sure we bring that same energy to the company.
Yeah. And if not, just always ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always
Yeah.
ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we are up for today. Our timing, Rod, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much for participating. Please join us next Monday, same time, same place, on the topic of how to assess a company's culture. So really great ending for
us. I want to plant this. If you can find the right company culture for you, that means they're finding the right you for them, right? It's like a square peg, square hole. When you interview, you just know it's right and they know it's right. That's a cool thing. And that's what companies are looking for these days. So I'm excited about this topic. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Kristen.